our next guest, Dane Brugler, has unleashed the beast.
Let's go.
The most thorough draft guide that you are going to find. He is an analyst for The Athletic. Joining us right now, Dane. I was going to ask you, I was going to have you go itemize through every player in the beast, but then I looked and you have 88 quarterbacks, and I'm told you got a hard out at 15 after. So let's just start out by talking about some of those big names at the top of the draft. Really, one of the biggest questions to me is going to be, at this point, Cam Ward pretty clearly established, going to be the number one pick, but how we sort out QB2, I'm very curious how you looked at those other guys who were vying in that position.
Yeah, that's the wild card of the draft, right? Who's going to be that number 2 quarterback? Will it be Shedeur Sanders or not? And how early will that be? I think for the longest time, a lot of people assumed, okay, the Browns need a quarterback at 2, the Giants need a quarterback at 3. It's going to be one of those 2 spots. But as we've gotten closer to the draft, I think people have realized, all right, teams don't necessarily see the rest of this quarterback class in that same light. And this comes a year after we saw 6 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks. So it's a really unique quarterback year. And let's say no quarterbacks go 2 or 3. Is Shedeur to the Saints at 9? Could it be to the Steelers? We're talking to the 20s at that point. And, there are some interesting fits when we get there. Could we see the Browns or Giants trade back up into the late 1 to get a Jackson Dart, to get Shedeur? Teams really like Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, who, if not for being a 7th-year senior, he's going to be a 26-year-old rookie, injuries in the past. If not for those issues, we'd be talking about him more regular as a first-round pick. He has that type of talent. So this is a really unique quarterback year. The need is there. The supply looks a little bit different than I think we're used to seeing.
One of those things that's always informative to me is, as I talk to coaches and scouts about the quarterbacks, is always, all right, compare them in another year. Compare these guys to, for instance, last year. Cam Ward, depending who you ask, he'd be pretty close to the top 3 guys, but not above necessarily all of them. And then with Shedeur, it's much more clouded. When you're just talking about the top quarterbacks, the guys you think are legit starters, where did you draw that line?
Yeah, and obviously last year, Penix going 8 was a surprise. Nick's going 12 was a surprise. And so it's kind of a reminder, like teams, they're going to roll the dice on quarterbacks. And with a guy like Shedeur, there's a lot to like. For whatever reason, at some point, you're not allowed to just like Shedeur. You have to love him or hate him. I don't know why it is, but there's a lot to like because he's smart, he's tough, he's poised, he's accurate. Not quite as accurate as maybe 74% completions would suggest. 28% of his completions were screen passes. So, but he's still generally an accurate quarterback. But the way he likes to play, does he have the physical traits to make that happen at the next level? And I think Shedeur can start in the NFL, but I'm not convinced that he can be a top 12 to 14 quarterback in the NFL. And ultimately, that's what you have to ask yourself if you're an NFL team. Can he be someone that's going to help us reach the playoffs, elevate the offense around him, or is he going to need a strong support system to really get us there? And I think that's where teams, there's definitely some disconnect and some differing opinions. But the over-under on quarterbacks in the first round is 2.5. And right now, I definitely take the over on that.
With Travis Hunter, I imagine, Dane, in all the years you've been doing this, you haven't had to spend as much time just to watch one game of a guy because you're talking about like 160 snaps all the time. What was it like to study him, and how did you go about sorting out where he would rank both as a wide receiver and a corner?
Yeah, and if I'm getting tired just watching the amount of tape to get him, I can't imagine what it's like for him to actually put in. And he doesn't get enough credit for not just the athletic ability that it takes to do that, but the mental commitment to understand what to do on offense, what to do on defense. And he played some special teams as well. And so it's interesting talking to teams about Travis Hunter because they all just are they marvel at what he's able to do. But okay, for the real world NFL transition, what does that mean? Can he really be a two-way player at the NFL? A lot of teams are convinced that he can do it. I think the bigger question is he a primary corner, or is he going to be primarily a receiver? And then the secondary position you try to mix in, and I think teams are split on that. I think the higher potential is at corner, where he has a sky-high ceiling, can be a top 3 corner in the NFL. But a lot of teams look at him on offense and say, look, he affects the scoreboard. How dynamic he is with the ball in his hands, I want to keep him on offense. So a lot of teams look at him at receiver, and you look at the Browns picking at number 2. We know they need offensive help. They ranked 32 last year in offensive scoring points per game, 32 in third down conversions. They need a spark on offense. And if they don't believe a quarterback is worthy at number 2, assuming Cam goes number 1, then I think Travis Hunter could be directly in their sights as a receiver, and they try to figure out how to mix him in on defense as well.
So setting aside Travis Hunter, who's a unicorn in this whole thing, this has been regarded as a draft class where you don't have a lot of those really high-end wide receivers like we've seen in recent years, guys who are in the top 10 type of conversation. You got a couple of them, though, in your top 15. When you looked at Ted McMillan, Matthew Golden, and some of those other guys, how'd you go about kind of ranking those receivers?
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of differing opinions around the league about how you stack these guys. And like you were saying, comparing this class to just, past classes, especially last year, if Brian Thomas was in this class, he didn't go until the 20s last year, but he would be the number 1 receiver in this class. And so it's not to take anything away from this year's wide receivers, but it is a little bit lighter compared to last year when we had 3 in the top 10, and then Brian Thomas was still available in the mid-20s. But they're still good players. And with McMillan, he's a little bit different because he's not a burner in terms of speed. He's not going to be a pure separator. He's more of that T. Higgins, who, T. Higgins ran a 4.59 when he was coming out as a prospect. But a guy that is going to win with his catch radius, win with just being a ball winner, and maybe the separation isn't consistent, but he catches it really well away from his frame. You rarely see that ball get into his body. And then with Matthew Golden, the way he came on later in the year for Texas and helping them reach the playoffs, win in the playoffs, I love so much about how his feet, his hips, his eyes, his shoulders as a route runner, they're all connected. And so he's able to create his own space. He can work inside, can work outside. Really like his fit. And you say like it with Dallas at 12, you think about what he can bring, pairing him with a CD Lamb. That makes a lot of sense. Or pairing him with, put him in Pittsburgh with the DK Metcalf. We'll see how that situation shakes out. So I think with Matthew Golden, maybe he doesn't have that star potential, but he'd be a really good secondary option for an offense.
I think pretty strong it says is Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter. Those are like the true, depending on how different teams say, like the blue prospects, right? The guys who are going to have a high grade, potential Hall of Fame type, really, really good players. Who else is in that category, Dane? In this entire class, who would you put in that upper echelon? And also, in other words, where do you not want to be in the draft where you're getting a lesser caliber of player?
Yeah, I think this is one of those years where it's not ideal to have a pick in that 6 to 12 range. It just, not every draft has top 10 picks. Even though 10 are going to go, they maybe don't have that type of grade, and this is that type of year. So, and that's why, I think the Browns would love to move back and get up some extra draft capital. But do you really want to move away from a Travis Hunter, from an Abdul Carter? Probably not, because, I think it is those two. And I think you could make a case for Ashton Jeanty. But obviously not every team is going to be comfortable drafting a running back that high. But Jeanty is, when teams talk about him, they talk about him like Saquon Barkley and how we talked about Bijan Robinson, a guy that could be a true difference maker, even though we don't have testing for him. But the teams that were at his pro day just gushed about how he did in the positional workouts, how he did catching the football. I mean, you're hearing LaDainian Tomlinson comparisons. And I think that's something, we didn't see him catch the ball as much this year, but that's something that teams always mention with Jeanty, is how much he impacts the passing game and how that's perfect for today's game. So even though we don't have a 40-yard dash for him, he put everything on tape. Ashton Jeanty is going to go somewhere in that top 10. And you can make a case for maybe Mason Graham from Michigan potentially being in that mix, maybe a few others. But, Will Campbell from LSU, who, we debate the arm length. But I think you look at the Patriots at number 4, they need a left tackle. You think about how good Drake May was this year with subpar talent around him. Okay, you add Stephon Diggs at receiver. What else are we going to do to help our young quarterback? Let's get him that left tackle. And I think you can make a case, Will Campbell, a top 5 player in this draft. But for the most part, I think after that initial tier of players, that second tier is lacking compared to what we've seen in years past.
So it's all in NewYorkTimes.com, theathletic.com, top 100, your positional rankings. I'm curious, of somebody later on, whether it's, toward the bottom of the top 100 or even a late round pick, who's somebody or a guy or two that you're higher on than maybe everybody else is right now?
There's definitely a few guys, and like a player who's really, I think, caught fire here recently, Kyle Williams, the receiver from Washington State, who, teams are always looking for firepower. And we talked about how the receivers this year at the top are good, but maybe not great. What does the day two receivers look like? Really like the Iowa State kids with Noel and Higgins. Aomanor from Stanford's a good player, but Kyle Williams from Washington State had a really good Senior Bowl. He went out and ran a 4.40 at the combine, and he hurt his hammy, so he wasn't able to work out at the pro day. But this is a guy that teams are trying to figure out more about. A lot of 30 visits, a lot of workouts. Teams are really intrigued by what Kyle Williams might bring to the field. And him and Torrey Horton from Colorado State hurt his knee midseason, so a little bit out of sight, out of mind. No Senior Bowl. Was kind of late to the process, had a late workout. But there's a lot to like about Torrey Horton as a guy that can create space. People might remember him from that epic Colorado State game, not this past year, the year before, and how effective he was in that game. Teams like him as a potential day two pick as well.
I'm also curious about this, Dane, because I do a quarterback story every year. I talk to coaches and scouts. I don't watch tape like you do, but I talk to people and try to get a general sense of what the consensus would be within the league on these guys. But I cut it off at anybody who's like a 7th to PFA guy. You've got rankings through 88 quarterbacks here. And I'm very curious, when you get down to it, not to rag on poor Derek Engel from the University of British Columbia, how much Derek Engel tape are you able to get? How do you even find University of British Columbia tape to have any type of an opinion as you get to that stage in these rankings?
Well, and that piece you do every year is a must read for everybody. It's really insightful what you get. The information you get helps me when I do my final mock draft. I'll put it that way. Look, there's over 2,600 players in the guide overall. And, I've at least watched one tape on all of them. But obviously some players you feel like, okay, I can move on now. And, I got the gist of what he is. Maybe he's not going to be an NFL player. Maybe he's going to be a CFL guy, UFL guy, whatever. But, I want to give them their due. All these guys are working so hard to get to this level and, want to make sure they're represented in the beast, give them a chance to have their testing information in there. If they're in a database with teams, then I know that teams are looking at them, and I want to treat my job like an area scout. I'm going to do the due diligence and make sure they're represented. So, that's why, I think teams really, I get a lot of feedback, a lot of text today about the Beast from some teams that really appreciate it because they know I put in the work. They know that this is not just a thing I throw together. It's a full year-round project.
Do they ever give you a quick little, but you're way off on this guy at the end of the compliments, Dane?
Oh, sure. Well, hey, look, we in doing it throughout the year, I'm constantly talking with teams about, hey, this guy and that guy and bouncing ideas off each other. And sure, absolutely. I mean, look, if we all agreed on these prospects, it wouldn't be any fun to talk about, right? It wouldn't be fun to debate them and trade different ideas about what they're going to be at the next level. So that debate is certainly a fun part of going through the entire process.
Dane, thank you very much. Everybody, just Google The Beast. I can give you all the websites and stuff. Just Google The Beast. Search it on Twitter. My colleague Ian Rappaport said earlier today, one of the best days of the year. So apparently the rest of Ian's life, not great, but it is a good day. So we get to read The Beast. Dane, thanks a ton for being here, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, be good.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, Tom.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.